A freezing wind swept across Denver that morning. Snow-blanketed City Park like a silent ocean of white. A police officer on K9 patrol slowed his cruiser. Something about the lone figure on the bench didn't feel right. The man sat motionless, wrapped in an old military jacket, his breath rising in pale mist. When the officer called for backup, dispatch sent in the K9 unit. Seconds later, the German Shepherd lunged forward through the snow, trained to obey, ready to strike. But halfway there, the impossible happened. The dog stopped, its tail lowered, its ears trembled, and a soft whimper cut through the wind. Because this wasn't a stranger at all. It was his old handler, the war veteran everyone thought had died decades ago. What happens next will warm even the coldest heart. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Your support truly means the world to us. Thank you, from the bottom of our hearts. January had frozen Denver into silence. The city breathed through clouds of frost, its streets lined with drifts of snow that muffled every sound. In City Park, the branches of old elms stood naked against the pale sky, their limbs heavy with frost. The benches wore white coats of ice, and the pond lay sealed beneath a sheet of glassy snow. The wind slid over the frozen surface, carrying the sharp scent of pine and the faint hum of distant traffic. In this quiet world sat a man who seemed carved out of the same winter, still gray and weathered by time. Walter Brooks was 71, a tall but stooped figure wrapped in an olive-green military jacket that had seen both jungles and decades. His hands, rough and scarred, clutched the edges of a frayed wool blanket draped over his knees. Beneath his white stubble and deep wrinkles were eyes the color of cold steel, eyes that once scanned battlefields in Vietnam, now fixed on nothing in particular. Walter had once been a Marine sergeant, a man others followed into fire, but the years had taken his platoon, his family, his home, and eventually even his voice in the world. Now he lived in the margins, drifting between shelters and silence. The morning sun, thin and pale, spilled across the park like a ghost of warmth. Walter's breath rose in misty clouds as he reached into his pocket, drawing out a small tin cup with a dent along its rim. He tapped it against the bench, brushing off frost, and poured the last of his lukewarm coffee from a thermos. The scent reminded him of mess tents, of laughter before dawn patrols, of brothers he hadn't seen in 50 years. He closed his eyes, letting the memory flicker, brief as a match in the wind. From across the path came laughter, harsh, cutting, too young to understand the weight of age. A group of 4 teenagers in puffy jackets and bright sneakers swaggered toward the bench, their breath puffing like dragons in the cold. One of them, a tall boy with a camera phone, nudged another and grinned. "Hey, check this out. Homeless vet content always gets clicks." His name was Darren Holt, 16, restless, with the arrogance of someone who had never known hunger or fear. His 3 friends, a girl chewing gum and 2 boys in hoodies, followed eagerly, their laughter loud against the quiet snow. They circled Walter like curious crows. "Hey, old man, that army jacket real? You win a war or just find it in the trash?" Darren jeered, his voice bouncing through the still air. Walter didn't look up. He bent forward, picking up a piece of litter that had blown near his boots, a candy wrapper, and folded it carefully before tucking it into his pocket. "Aw, come on," one of the others snickered, holding the phone closer. "Give us something, Grandpa. Say, Semper Fi, for the camera." For a moment, Walter said nothing. Then quietly he murmured, "Discipline is doing the right thing, even when no one's watching." His voice was soft, worn, but steady. The laughter faltered. The kids exchanged uneasy looks. Darren lowered his phone a little, his smirk cracking into uncertainty. But pride wouldn't let him back down. He scoffed. "Man, whatever. Dude's nuts. Let's go." And they left, their footsteps crunching fast across the snow. Walter exhaled slowly, fog rolling from his mouth. He looked at the empty bench beside him, then at the gray sky. "Still fighting, huh, Brooks?" he muttered to himself. A few minutes later, the faint rhythm of smaller footsteps approached. He turned slightly. A little girl, no more than 8, came trudging through the snow, her red wool coat bright as a flame in the white landscape. Her blonde hair, soft and slightly curled, poked from beneath a white knit hat. and her mittened hands held a steaming cup of cocoa. She was followed by a woman, tall, graceful, in a silver-gray winter coat, carrying a grocery bag in one hand. The girl stopped before Walter, breath puffing out like tiny clouds. Her eyes were wide, curious, and kind. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly in the cold, "you look cold. Here." She stretched out the cup with both hands. The woman hesitated. "Lily, honey," but the girl turned to her mother, her tone soft but sure. "He needs it more than I do." Walter looked at her, startled. The warmth in her eyes caught him off guard, cutting through years of invisibility. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he accepted the cup. "Thank you," he whispered. "You're very kind." Lily smiled, a quick, radiant thing that seemed to light the air. "It's okay. My grandpa was in the army, too. He says heroes don't wear capes, they wear coats like yours." The woman, Sarah Parker, offered a polite nod, still keeping her distance. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slender, with soft brown hair tied into a bun beneath her hat. Her face carried the tired grace of someone who had weathered too many storms, a widow who worked double shifts at a hospital, a mother raising her child alone. Life had made her cautious, sometimes to the edge of cynicism, but never unkind. "Come on, sweetheart," she said gently. "Let the man rest." Walter smiled faintly. "She's got a good heart. You must be proud." Sarah hesitated, something like guilt flickering behind her eyes. "I try. You stay warm, sir." As they walked away, Walter lifted the cup. The cocoa was rich and sweet, and the warmth burned pleasantly in his chest. For the first time in days, he felt something close to peace. But peace never lasted long. The sound of tires crunching over ice broke the calm. Walter looked up to see a police cruiser pulling onto the park path, its headlights slicing through the fog. The vehicle stopped, and 3 uniformed officers stepped out. Their breath smoked in the frigid air, their dark blue jackets bearing the emblem of the Denver Police Department. The man in front was Officer Raymond Dalton, late 40s, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and tired blue eyes. He carried himself with authority, though his face showed the weariness of too many winters on the job. Beside him was Officer Kyle Riley, younger, restless, with sharp features and a jaw always set in tension. The third was Officer Maria Martinez, the only woman, mid-30s, with her dark hair pulled tight under her cap, her expression careful, alert, but not unkind. Dalton spoke first, his tone professional but firm. "Afternoon, sir. We got a report about a suspicious individual loitering here. Mind showing some ID?" Walter blinked, startled. "Suspicious?" His voice was calm but confused. He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a battered leather wallet. Inside was an old, faded Marine Corps ID, its edges frayed, the photo nearly ghosted by time. He handed it to Dalton. The officer examined it, frowning. "Vietnam era, huh? This thing's older than half my squad." Riley shifted impatiently, scanning Walter's worn bag and thermos. "You sure that's him? Anyone could carry that." Dalton shrugged. "Hard to tell. We'll call it in." Martinez stepped closer, her eyes softening as she looked at Walter. "You live around here, sir?" Walter hesitated. "You could say that. I move around, parks, shelters, wherever the wind stops blowing." Riley muttered under his breath. "Yeah, sounds about right." Dalton shot him a look. "Easy." Then to Walter. "You understand? We have to check. People get nervous, and with the break-ins lately—" "I get it," Walter said quietly. "You're doing your job." Martinez gave a small nod, but Riley wasn't done. "Dispatch," he said into his radio. "We might need K-9 support, possible concealed weapon." Dalton turned sharply. "Riley, hold on." But the younger officer waved him off. "Standard procedure." The static crackled. "Copy that," came the reply. "K-9 unit en route." Walter lowered his gaze. His breath came slower now, heavier. The cocoa cup in his hand trembled, a dark drop spilling into the snow. Around them, the park seemed to hold its breath. Dalton rubbed the back of his neck, uneasy. "Sir, I'm sure it's nothing. Just stay still for a moment." Walter nodded. "I've stayed still most of my life, officer. I can manage a bit longer." In the distance, a siren wailed faintly, low, mournful, carried on the wind. Then came the bark of a dog, deep and commanding, echoing through the park. Martinez glanced up, squinting toward the road. "That's the K9 unit," Dalton sighed. "Let's just get this over with." As the sound drew closer, Riley adjusted his stance, one hand resting near his holster. Snow whipped through the air, the flakes glittering like glass under the gray sun. Walter sat still, eyes closed, feeling the vibration of paws against frozen ground, a rhythm he somehow remembered. The barking grew louder, and when he opened his eyes, he saw the blur of a German shepherd, muscles rippling beneath its black and tan coat, bounding through the snow toward him. And then, for the briefest second, Walter smiled, not in fear, but in something deeper, recognition. The dog's growl rolled through the park. Its handler shouted a command. The wind howled. The snow swirled. And then, everything stopped. The sound of patrol sirens echoed, mixed with the barking of dogs across the white snow. The siren's echo faded into the stillness as flashing red and blue lights swept across the park, painting streaks of color over the snow. Ice glistened like shattered glass under the police headlights. The officers turned toward the sound of pounding paws. The K9 unit had arrived. A German shepherd surged forward, its handler just steps behind, snow crunching beneath heavy boots. Officer Daniel Carter moved with the confidence of a man used to control, but there was a quiet weariness in the set of his shoulders. 35 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, he had a square jaw and short brown hair that curled slightly under his police cap. His green eyes, sharp and assessing, had seen more than their share of chaos. Too many arrests gone wrong, too many split-second decisions that haunted his nights. He was the kind of officer who did his job by the book because deviation, once, had nearly cost him everything. 3 years ago, his partner had been killed during a drug bust that spiraled out of control. The dog that served with them, a decorated K9 named Shadow, had vanished that same night in the blizzard. Not a trace had been found. Daniel had mourned them both, one buried, the other lost to mystery. Now, as he gave the signal, something in him tightened. The air was heavy, the wind carrying a tension that raised goosebumps under his uniform. "Prepare K9, he called, voice clipped but calm. The other officers stepped back, forming a semicircle around the old man still standing beside the bench. Shadow growled low, muscles coiled beneath his black and tan coat. His breath came out in bursts of white steam. The leather harness on his back gleamed faintly under the flashing lights. The tag reading, Denver Police K9 Unit, swinging with each subtle movement. The German shepherd was 9 years old, still powerful, but marked with scars. One along the shoulder, another near his ear. His amber eyes locked on Walter, calculating, waiting for command. "Attack!" Daniel's voice broke the air like a whip. The dog leapt forward, snow exploding under his paws. The onlookers gasped, even Sarah and Lily, who had frozen a few yards away near the path. Sarah clutched her daughter's shoulders tightly, whispering a prayer she couldn't finish. The officers braced for impact, hands twitching toward their weapons. And then, just as the shepherd closed the distance, the impossible happened. Shadow stopped. The bark died in his throat, replaced by a strange, trembling whine. His tail sank low, his ears flattened against his skull, and his body quivered, not with aggression, but with recognition. The world seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's command stuck in his throat as the dog's eyes softened, staring at the old man as if through time itself. Walter's breath hitched. The recognition was mutual. His lips parted, and for the first time in years, his voice cracked into a sound halfway between disbelief and joy. "Shadow." The shepherd took a slow, uncertain step forward, sniffing the air, then another. His entire body trembled before he broke into a sprint again, not to attack, but to leap into Walter's arms. The old man sank to his knees, the cane of age forgotten, as the dog pressed its head against his chest, tail wagging furiously. The sob that escaped Walter's throat was raw and heavy, echoing through the cold air. He clutched the dog tightly, burying his face in the thick fur as tears spilled freely into the snow. "My God, you're alive," he whispered. "You're alive, Shadow." Daniel froze, lowering his gun as the impossible truth unfolded before him. Martinez covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide. Even Riley, usually brash, looked stunned. The air, moments ago heavy with hostility, had turned sacred. The old Marine and his lost dog, reunited after decades, knelt in the snow as the city lights flickered behind them. Walter's trembling fingers found the tag on Shadow's collar. "I trained this dog," he murmured through tears. "He was military before he was police. Vietnam, 1970. He paused, eyes distant, lost in a swirl of memory. "We were in Da Nang, ambushed. He saved 6 men that night. They said he was gone after the last airstrike, but he must have survived. Someone found him, trained him again." His voice broke. He never forgot. The crowd that had gathered watched in silence. Lily tugged free from her mother's grasp and ran toward them, red coat flaring like a spark against the white ground. Sarah called after her, but the girl ignored it. She threw her arms around Walter's shoulder, giggling through tears. "I knew you weren't a bad man. I told Mommy you weren't." Walter smiled through wet eyes, resting a hand gently on her small arm. "You were right, sweetheart. Sometimes the world just forgets before it remembers." Daniel finally holstered his weapon, stepping closer. "Sir, I don't know what to say. This dog, he remembers me," Walter said simply. "That's enough." Shadow lifted his head, looking between them as if understanding every word. His tail brushed the snow, rhythmic, steady, grounding the moment. Then Daniel's radio crackled. "Unit 12, status check." His hand moved to his shoulder instinctively, but before he could answer, Shadow stiffened. His ears twitched toward the trees at the edge of the park. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Daniel muttered. All eyes turned as a figure appeared through the drifting snow. A man in a dark overcoat moving away from the scene. His steps were deliberate, calm, leaving a trail of deep footprints that glowed faintly blue in the flashing light. The man didn't look back. "Hey, you there!" Riley shouted, already moving forward, but the figure slipped into the tree line, swallowed by darkness. Something small fell from his hand and landed in the snow near the bench. Martinez crouched, brushing aside frost to reveal a leather satchel, half buried. "Sir," she called to Dalton, "there's something here." Daniel knelt beside her, unbuckling the flap. Inside were documents, aged, weather-stained, but intact. He pulled one free and blinked. "This is military." He turned it toward the light. The page bore an old U.S. Department of Defense seal and a faded name. Walter J. Brooks, Sergeant, 3rd Marine Division. Walter stared, breath catching in his throat. "That's mine. My service file. I lost it in 70, in the ambush." Daniel looked up sharply, scanning the darkness where the stranger had vanished. "Why would someone drop this here?" Before anyone could answer, another presence approached. A man wrapped in a thick gray parka with a press badge pinned to his scarf. He was in his late 20s, with a mop of wind-tossed brown hair and a camera slung around his neck. "I saw everything," he said breathlessly. "Name's Evan Reed, freelance journalist. That was unbelievable." He pointed his lens toward Walter and Shadow. "Sir, you mind if I—" Daniel cut him off. "You're not putting that online." Evan raised his hands defensively. "I just document what's real, officer, and this—" He gestured to Walter, hugging Shadow. "This is real." Sarah, standing now beside Lily, frowned. "Maybe the world needs to see it," she said softly. Her voice carried both caution and compassion. She looked at Walter, who still knelt in the snow, cradling the old shepherd like a lost child returned. Maybe people need to remember what heroes look like. The tension broke like ice cracking underfoot. Daniel exhaled slowly, holstering his radio. "We'll sort this out at the station, for now." He looked at Walter. "Sir, are you all right? You'll need to come with us, just to clear things up." Walter nodded weakly, standing with effort. Shadow stayed close, pressing against his leg protectively. Daniel extended a gloved hand, steadying him. Their eyes met, soldier to soldier, though years and roles separated them. As they turned toward the cruiser, the wind rose again, scattering snow across the empty bench. Behind them, the satchel lay half open, papers fluttering like pale ghosts in the dark. None of them noticed the faint imprint of another set of boots leading away, heavier, deeper, nor the small black mark burned into the satchel's leather flap, shaped like a serpent coiled around a cross. Shadow looked back once, growled softly, then followed his master into the light. The world outside the Denver Police Department was buried beneath snow by morning. Pale sunlight filtered through the frosted windows, glinting off the patrol cars lined up outside like frozen sentinels. Inside, the hum of the building seemed oddly distant, muffled by the heavy silence of disbelief that had followed the night before. Officer Daniel Carter sat at his desk, the faint steam from his untouched coffee rising into the air. The leather satchel lay open in front of him, its contents spread across a stack of files and reports. Among them gleamed a Medal of Honor, dulled by age but unmistakable in design. He held it gently, tracing the engraved words, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty." Beneath the inscription was a name, Sergeant Walter J. Brooks. Daniel's brows knitted as he looked to his partner for the day, Officer Maria Martinez, who stood across the table, arms folded. She was in her mid-30s with dark brown hair tied neatly under her cap and a steady gaze that could disarm most suspects with a single look. Compassion had always tempered her discipline. She was known for treating civilians with respect in a department that too often forgot humanity behind procedures. "You're sure it's his?" she asked quietly. "He didn't even seem to know it existed," Daniel replied, setting the medal down carefully. "It was in that satchel the mystery man dropped, along with this." He picked up one of the papers, an official military document stamped confidential. It bore faded signatures, ink bleeding into the fibers of time. Some words had been redacted, but one line stood out. "Operation Morning Star, classified personnel transfer." Martinez frowned. "Morning Star? That's Cold War era. What's that doing here?" "That's what I'd like to know." Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I checked the call log. The report about a suspicious vagrant came from the same district that's under investigation for that data breach last month. Someone wanted us there. Someone wanted this encounter to happen." Before Martinez could respond, a knock came at the door. It opened to reveal Captain Harold Sloan, head of the precinct. He was in his late 50s, built like an oak, his hair silver, but his eyes still sharp as ever. The kind of man who commanded respect without ever needing to raise his voice. "Carter," he said, stepping inside, "the chief's seen the footage. You've got a situation on your hands." "Footage?" Daniel echoed. Sloan dropped a tablet on the desk, the screen already glowing. On it played a video, shaky, amateur, filmed from the park. The moment when Shadow stopped, recognized Walter, and leapt into his arms. The sound of gasps and distant crying filled the tiny office. That was taken by a freelance journalist, Clara Jensen. She posted it online last night. It's viral. Or Same Shadow. The hero dog is trending nationwide. Daniel leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "She posted this without clearance?" "Welcome to the internet," Sloan said dryly. "Public's eating it up. Veterans groups, animal rescues, even the mayor's office called this morning. People think we're heroes for reuniting a soldier and his war dog. They don't know the half of it." Martinez crossed her arms. "And the other half?" Sloan's expression darkened. "Internal Affairs wants to know how that dog ended up serving under Denver PD when its military record shows it went missing in 1970. Someone falsified the transfer papers. And they want you," he nodded at Daniel, "to find out who." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Great. And what about Brooks?" "We're keeping him under observation for now. He's in the outreach center on Colfax. The city's veteran housing program is taking care of him until we sort this out." When Sloan left, Daniel turned to Martinez, his voice low. "This goes way deeper than a missing dog." She nodded. "You think that man who ran off? He knew exactly what was in that satchel." "Yeah," Daniel said, "and I'm going to find him." Across town, Clara Jensen was sitting in a coffee shop, her laptop glowing in the dim light. She was 29, with chestnut brown hair loosely tied and a gray scarf around her neck. She had a journalist's instinct, part curiosity, part conscience, and she'd made a name for herself chasing stories others ignored. But this one was different. Her video had reached 2 million views overnight. Comments flooded in. "This broke my heart. Shadow deserves a medal. Honor that veteran." But Clara couldn't stop thinking about the stranger in the black coat, slipping away into the snow. She replayed the footage frame by frame until she caught it, a faint reflection of his face in the glass of a streetlight. She froze the image, enhanced it, and gasped softly. It was Mark Redding. Once a decorated officer in the Denver PD, Redding had been dismissed 6 years earlier amid a corruption scandal involving embezzled funds and evidence tampering. Clara had written an article about him back then, her first big investigative piece. He'd vanished afterward, leaving behind whispers that he'd been protected by someone higher up. Now seeing him there, near Walter's bench, sent a chill crawling down her spine. She pulled out her phone and called Daniel Carter. "Detective Carter?" "Officer," he corrected automatically. "Right. Officer, I'm the one who posted the video. Listen, I think I know who that man was in the park." "You shouldn't even have that footage." "Forget that," Clara snapped. "His name's Mark Redding, ex-DPD. He's dirty. And if he's mixed up in this, you've got more than a missing file problem." Daniel was silent for a moment. "Send me what you've got." By late afternoon, snow began falling again. Slower this time, lazy spirals drifting from the gray sky. Walter sat in a small veterans' shelter on Colfax Avenue, wrapped in a clean blanket. Shadow lay at his feet, eyes half closed but ears twitching at every noise. The dog's presence had transformed the space. Even the volunteers, young men and women, who usually moved in hurried sympathy, slowed their steps when they saw the pair. The shelter's supervisor, Helen Morris, a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense voice, brought him a cup of soup. "You're quite the celebrity, Mr. Brooks. They've been calling from the papers all morning." Walter smiled faintly. "Didn't think people remembered old soldiers anymore." "They remember when they're reminded," she said, setting down the bowl. He ate quietly, Shadow resting a paw across his boot. Outside, a television played the news, the viral clip looping again and again. People clapped in airports, children hugged dogs, hashtags flooded the screen. Walter shook his head softly. "The world loves a miracle," he murmured. That night, long after the lights dimmed, a gust of wind rattled the window. Shadow's ears perked. He lifted his head, a low growl rising in his throat. Walter frowned, following the dog's gaze toward the door. A shadow moved outside. A folded slip of paper slid under the threshold, carried by the draft. Walter rose stiffly, picked it up, and unfolded it. 5 words were scrawled in black ink, the letters jagged and rushed. "If you speak, you die." He stared at it for a long time, his hands trembling. Then, without a word, he crouched and tucked the paper into the breast pocket of his coat, right next to his Medal of Honor. Shadow growled again, pressing close against his leg. Walter placed a hand on the dog's head, whispering, "Easy, boy. We've been through worse." But his eyes were distant, full of ghosts. Outside, in the swirling snow, a dark car idled across the street. Inside sat a man with a scar across his cheek, the same man from the park, Mark Redding, watching the shelter's doorway through fogged glass. His phone buzzed. A text appeared from an unknown number. The file wasn't supposed to resurface. Finish it. He glanced once more at the window, where the faint outline of Walter and Shadow could be seen in the glow of the heater, then drove off into the falling snow. By nightfall, the snowstorm had swallowed Denver whole. The streets lay deserted, the power lines hummed faintly beneath the weight of frozen wind, and the city's usual hum of life was muted beneath layers of white silence. It wasn't just another winter storm. It was the kind that made history, the kind that turned headlights into ghosts and footsteps into memories. Through that blinding storm, 4 figures pushed forward in the pale beams of an old pickup truck. Walter Brooks, Clara Jensen, Officer Daniel Carter, and little Lily Parker. Daniel gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles pale beneath his gloves. His suspension from duty had come earlier that day, a temporary administrative review for accessing classified data without authorization. Yet here he was, ignoring every rule he'd once sworn to uphold. The snow slashed against the windshield like claws, and the wipers struggled to keep up. "You sure this friend of yours still lives out here?" he asked. Walter sat beside him, wrapped in his patched military coat. Shadow curled at his feet in the back seat. "Sam Green doesn't just live anywhere," Walter said quietly. "He hides, same as me. He used to be a police sergeant until he started asking the wrong questions." Clara, sitting behind Daniel, leaned forward slightly. Her face glowed faintly in the dim light from her laptop screen. She had been working non-stop since they left the shelter, decrypting old documents from the satchel, cross-referencing names, piecing together a puzzle older than she was. "If what I'm seeing is right," she murmured, Someone's been laundering money through fake veteran assistance programs. Millions funneled through shell charities tied to ex-officers. Redding's name pops up 3 times. Walter nodded grimly. Mark always liked easy money, even back in the day. Lily, tucked beneath a red wool blanket, shivered slightly but refused to sleep. Her blonde curls stuck to her rosy cheeks, and her blue eyes were wide with both fear and curiosity. "Mr. Walter," she whispered, "why are bad people so afraid of papers?" Walter smiled faintly, looking back at her. "Because the truth doesn't melt away like snow, sweetheart. It stays." The truck groaned as Daniel turned off the main road, following a barely visible path through a thicket of frost-bitten pines. Finally, through the curtain of snow, the outline of a cabin appeared, a squat wooden structure half buried beneath drifts, its porch light flickering weakly. Smoke rose from the chimney, coiling into the wind. Samuel Green opened the door before they even knocked. He was a man in his late 60s, broad but stooped, with a face carved from both laughter and regret. His beard was streaked with white, and one eye bore the faint cloudiness of an old injury. He wore a heavy brown parka and carried a cane fashioned from polished hickory. "Walter Brooks," he said with a low whistle. "Didn't think I'd see your stubborn face again before Judgment Day." His voice carried the warmth of old friendship beneath the gravel of age. Walter grinned faintly. "Judgment's coming for all of us, Sam. Thought I'd beat it to your door first." Samuel's eyes flicked to Daniel and Clara. "You brought company. They're here because someone wants me gone, and because Shadow found me first." At the mention of the dog, Samuel looked down and smiled as Shadow sniffed his boots. "Still guarding Marines, huh, boy?" He reached to scratch behind the shepherd's ears, and the animal wagged its tail in approval. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit, but warm. A wood stove crackled in the corner, filling the air with the scent of pine and old iron. Maps, radios, and disassembled firearms lay scattered across a long table. Clara immediately took to the workspace, spreading out her laptop and files, while Samuel poured coffee for the others. "I've been watching the department for years," Samuel said after a long pause, settling into his chair. "Redding didn't disappear. He went underground. There's a network, Walters, a pipeline moving stolen weapons and dirty money through private security firms. The kind that never make headlines but keep politicians comfortable." Daniel leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "You're saying this goes up the chain?" Samuel met his eyes. "All the way. You, Carter, you're a good cop, but you're just now seeing how deep the rot goes." Outside, the wind howled harder, rattling the shutters. Clara frowned at her screen. "If we release these files, the public needs proof. Names, dates, cross-references. Without them, it'll look like another internet rumor." "Then we find them," Daniel said firmly, "before Redding finds us." Hours passed. The blizzard only worsened. The power flickered twice before going out entirely, leaving only the glow of the stove and the lantern Samuel had hung by the window. The 4 adults spoke in hushed tones while Lily drifted to sleep on the couch, Shadow lying beside her like a guardian. Just after midnight, Samuel stood, pulling on his heavy coat. "I'll check the generator," he muttered. "Can't have us freezing before we bring down half the department." He gave a half smile before stepping into the storm. Snow swirled around him as he crossed the porch, his flashlight cutting a pale beam through the darkness. The wind screamed across the ridge. He reached the side of the cabin, where the generator hummed weakly under a tarp. He knelt, brushing off ice, when a faint crack split the air, like glass breaking. He turned sharply. The last thing he saw was a dark shape emerging from the storm. Inside, Shadow shot up, ears stiff, a low growl rising in his throat. Daniel was on his feet instantly. "Something's wrong." Before anyone could respond, the sound of splintering wood echoed through the cabin. The back window exploded inward, shards of glass scattering across the floor. The lantern flickered wildly as the cold rushed in. "Get down!" Daniel shouted, pulling Clara and Walter behind the overturned table. Shadow bolted through the doorway, barking furiously, his growls cutting through the storm like thunder. Outside, chaos erupted, the sound of snarling, scuffling, and a muffled yell. "Shadow!" Walter cried, grabbing his coat and stumbling toward the door despite Daniel's protest. He stepped out into the storm, snow immediately coating his shoulders. Through the flurry, he saw 2 silhouettes struggling near the tree line, a man and the dog. A gun flashed once, a brief spark in the dark, and a yelp tore through the wind. "No!" Walter screamed, running forward. The assailant fled into the white abyss, vanishing as if swallowed by the storm. Walter dropped to his knees beside Shadow, whose fur was streaked with crimson at the shoulder. The shepherd whimpered softly, eyes half-lidded but still alert. Walter cradled him close, tears freezing on his cheeks. "You still save me? Even now?" he whispered. "Old soldier." Daniel arrived moments later, scanning the tree line. "He's gone." Whoever it was, he knew the place. Samuel stumbled back toward them, limping, his flashlight cracked but still flickering. "He cut the fuel line," he panted. "The generator's dead. We can't stay here long." Inside, Clara tore strips from a towel, pressing them against Shadow's wound. Lily, now awake and frightened, clung to Walter's arm. "Is he going to die?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Walter shook his head, steadying his breath. "No, he's survived worse." He looked at Daniel. "We don't have time. If they're after me, they'll come again. We release everything tonight." Daniel hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Do it." Clara set up her laptop by the window, tapping furiously. The storm outside blurred the world into white, but inside the small cabin, the glow of her screen burned bright, a fragile beacon against the darkness. One by one, she uploaded the files, the secret contracts, the falsified reports, the list of names connecting police officers, politicians, and corporate donors to the smuggling network. "It's live," she said breathlessly. "Every major outlet will have it by dawn." Walter leaned back, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Then maybe the truth finally belongs to someone else. The phone on Samuel's table rang. It was an old rotary model, the kind no one used anymore. The sound made everyone freeze. Samuel picked it up slowly, his hand trembling. "Hello?" A voice hissed on the other end, low and distorted. "We know what you're doing. There won't be a next time." The line went dead. Outside, the storm screamed louder, drowning the world in white. The morning after the blizzard dawned with a strange kind of stillness, as though the city itself was holding its breath. The storm that had raged through the night left Denver gleaming beneath an ocean of snow, every rooftop and lamppost crowned in silver. For the first time in weeks, sunlight poured across the landscape, glittering on the frozen ground like scattered diamonds. City Park, once the stage of doubt and fear, had transformed into a gathering place of hope. The air was crisp, the sky a boundless blue, and the people came in waves, citizens, veterans, police officers, and reporters, all drawn by the story that had captured the nation. At the heart of it stood Walter Brooks. He wore his restored Marine uniform, the same olive fabric he had once carried through mud and fire, now pressed and clean. On his chest gleamed the Medal of Honor that had finally been returned to him. His posture was steady despite his age. His eyes, though lined and weary, carried the calm of a man who had already faced every kind of storm. Beside him stood Officer Daniel Carter, his suspension lifted after the truth came to light. His uniform was sharp, though the fatigue beneath his eyes betrayed the sleepless nights that led here. And crouched faithfully near Walter's boots was Shadow, his black and tan fur brushed smooth, his bandaged leg resting lightly in the snow. The wound from the night before hadn't stopped him from showing up. Nothing ever did. Across the park, Clara Jensen adjusted her camera rig, her fingers red from the cold, but her expression radiant. She had been awake for 36 hours, fielding interviews and coordinating the live stream that now beamed across the country. Her video from the cabin, proof of the cover-up, the smuggling network, and Redding's crimes, had gone viral again. People had begun calling it the Shadow Files. Nearby, Sarah Parker held her daughter Lily's hand, both wrapped in thick winter coats. Sarah's brown hair shimmered under the morning light, and for once, the exhaustion that usually weighed down her features had lifted. She had brought Lily to witness what she called the day truth stood up for itself. The girl clutched a small handmade sign in crayon that read, "Thank you, Shadow." A small stage had been set near the park's memorial fountain, its surface still rimmed with frost. Reporters huddled with cameras, the microphones lined like soldiers awaiting command. Behind them, the Denver Police Department's honor guards stood at attention, their uniforms immaculate, their faces solemn. Walter stepped up to the podium. The murmur of the crowd dimmed until only the rustle of wind through the bare trees remained. Clara's camera zoomed in. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice gravelly but steady. "I've worn this uniform for most of my life," he began. "Once it meant orders and duty. Later, it meant survival. But today, it means something else. It means memory." He paused, glancing down at the medal on his chest. "I don't stand here to accuse or divide. I'm not against the police. I'm against what happens when good men look away, when we forget the truth or those who gave everything to protect it." The silence deepened. Daniel's eyes flickered with quiet respect. Even the reporters seemed to hold back their questions. Walter continued, "I've seen enough war to know the cost of silence, and I've seen enough peace to know how fragile it is. If there's one thing this old soldier still believes in, it's that justice isn't about power, it's about remembrance." For a moment, no one moved. Then, a single pair of hands began to clap, Sarah's. It spread through the crowd, slow at first, then rising in a thunder of applause that echoed across the park. Walter bowed his head slightly, overcome. Shadow barked once, as if seconding the sentiment, his voice strong despite the pain in his leg. Mayor Linda Grant stepped forward from the crowd, a tall woman in her early 50s with auburn hair tucked neatly into a navy coat. Known for her no-nonsense leadership and compassion for veterans, she had personally demanded this ceremony. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice carrying through the microphone, "on behalf of the city of Denver, we honor your courage, your service, and your refusal to be forgotten." She took the Medal of Honor from its velvet case and pinned it once more to Walter's chest. "You remind us that integrity is not lost to time, and to your loyal companion." She turned toward Shadow, smiling. "We name him the Dog of Justice for his bravery and devotion." The applause rose again, rippling like a wave through the sea of onlookers. Cameras flashed. Some veterans in the crowd saluted. Others simply stood, with tears streaming down their cheeks. Then, through the cheering, came a commotion. 2 officers emerged from the crowd, escorting a man in handcuffs. The world seemed to tilt for a moment as Walter recognized the face, Mark Redding. His overcoat was disheveled, his gray hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. The arrogance that once colored his features had drained away, replaced by a hollow calm. Clara instinctively turned her camera toward him. Daniel stepped forward, expression unreadable. "Mark Redding, you are under arrest for corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Redding smirked faintly, even as the crowd jeered. "You think this ends with me?" he muttered, but his voice was drowned by the roar of the people. Lily broke free from her mother's grasp and ran to Walter. Her red coat flared against the white snow as she wrapped her small arms around his waist. "I told you, Mr. Walter," she said breathlessly. "I knew you weren't a bad man." Walter bent down, his eyes crinkling into a smile. "You were the first one who did," he said softly. Nearby, Clara lifted her camera and captured the moment, the old soldier kneeling in the snow, the child in red holding him tight, and the loyal dog by his side. The sun caught the edge of the Medal of Honor just as she pressed the shutter, sending a beam of gold across the frame. It would become the image that defined the story, the symbol of loyalty, justice, and second chances. The park erupted once more into applause. Hours later, as the crowd dispersed and reporters packed their equipment, Walter stood quietly by the fountain, watching the sunlight melt through the icicles. Daniel approached, hands in his coat pockets. "You could have been a senator after that speech," he said with a wry smile. Walter chuckled. "No, son, I've had enough orders in my life. I think I'll just try living for once." Behind them, Clara closed her laptop and slipped her camera into its case. "I sent the photo to the wire services," she said. "They'll publish it nationwide by tomorrow. You'll be everywhere, Walter." He turned to her, shaking his head. "Not me. Him." He nodded to Shadow, who was lying contentedly beside Lily, the girl stroking his fur with gentle hands. That evening, the city gathered again, not for ceremony, but for gratitude. Donations poured in from across the country, and by nightfall, Walter had been given the keys to a small apartment near the edge of the park. It wasn't grand, but it was his. The living room smelled faintly of cedar. The heater hummed softly. Walter sat by the window, gazing at the snow drifting outside. Shadow lay beside him, his head resting on Walter's knee, his breathing slow and even. On the table sat a folded newspaper, its front page bearing Clara's photograph, and a headline that read, "The Man Who Remembered and the Dog Who Never Forgot." Walter reached down, scratching Shadow behind the ear. "We did it, boy," he murmured. Finally. Outside, snowflakes began to fall again, not in fury, but gently, peacefully. The world seemed quieter, warmer, as if the storm had left behind something purer in its wake. At City Park, where everything had begun, a new wooden plaque had been mounted on the old bench where Walter once sat alone. The inscription gleamed softly under the lamplight, "For those who were once forgotten, and the hearts that remembered how to love." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint sound of a dog's bark and the laughter of a little girl in a red coat. And Denver, blanketed in white, finally slept in peace. Sometimes miracles do not come with thunder or light. They come quietly through the loyalty of an old dog, the courage of a forgotten soldier, or the kindness of a little child in a red coat. What happened between Walter, Shadow, and those who stood for truth reminds us that God still works in mysterious ways. He sends love and protection not only through people, but sometimes through the hearts of animals who never forget us. In every storm, there is always a light waiting to break through the clouds. Maybe it's forgiveness, maybe it's faith, but it's there if we choose to see it. Just like Walter learned, even when the world turns cold, God can still bring warmth through compassion, loyalty, and the courage to do what's right. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to thank God for the blessings in your life. Pray for those who feel forgotten, and for the animals who continue to love us without asking for anything in return. Type "Amen" in the comments if you believe miracles still happen. Share this story to remind others that love, faith, and loyalty are never truly lost. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will warm your heart and restore your faith in God's amazing grace.